I have been asked to share my experiences on variation as an attorney at law, meaning external legal advisor, which might be slightly different from the experience shared by Julian as an in-house counsel. I have to say that as lawyers, our clients call us only when they are facing a major legal issue and if they are facing important costs. So, to be honest, attorneys at law do not work every day on variation. But lucky me, believe me or not, I have all my clients over the last 5 years, I've faced many issues on their construction contract, and I have some practical example on variation issues. So I will concentrate on practical example, and I will not develop all legal and regulation concerning variation, which has been developed this morning by my colleagues from YKVM and LNT. So to illustrate my experience, I want to speak about the Hanoi Metro Line 3 project. I will not disclose any confidential information by saying that this project is facing some delay over the last 10 years. But you would understand that as a lawyer, I cannot go as deep as Julian's did in his presentation for confidentiality reasons. So basically, it's a metro line. You have 8 elevated stations, 4 underground stations. And what is important, it's an ODA project, mainly French, Agence Française de Développement, AFD. You have the French government as well, and the Asian Development Bank. Thank you for the recall. And since it is an ODA project, it is governed contractually by a FIDIC Pink Book 2010 version, which is the FIDIC book we are used to work on in Vietnam for ODA project mainly. It is important, I think, 9 different contract packages, which is for me, and it has not been discussed this morning, a cause of variation, an indirect cause of variation, because the packing, when you have 9, 12, 13, 15 different contractors, it will entail some difficulties, delays, you will need to adapt, and it will entail at final points variation. So I just wanted to specify that according to my experience, this kind of packing will entail variation. Sorry. I know that this morning we have talked a lot about legal regulation, and I heard many times, oh, it's a FIDIC book, it's a FIDIC book, it's a FIDIC book, it's FIDIC provision. But I have to remind you that there is like 6 or 7 different colors of FIDIC book, and all those different versions do not have the same provision concerning variation. And inside these different provisions, you have different editions: 99, 2017, 2017 reprinted in 2022. And you may check the different provisions on variation are not drafted the same way. And it's quite important. So here we are on a pink book, right? I will go quite fast because it's more or less what Julian read 10 minutes. So I will go straight to the point, except that here we have an engineer. So variation is always initiated by an instruction of the engineer, not the employer, except in your case, Julian, but by the engineer. Everybody knows that, but I have to say that since I'm in Vietnam, I have received instruction from the employer. So you have to recall the employer, and Mr. Employer, that's not your job to do that. Second, this instruction, the contractor should execute it and is bound by the instruction, except if he makes some reservation. But I mean, the engineer can always say, no, you have to do the variation. Third, it may be initiated by a request of the engineer, and prior the instruction, the engineer can request an evaluation. Julian developed that before, which is quite comfortable because here, in this point, you have an upfront agreement about the cost, about the work, etc., which is not the case in the first situation. And then finally, but it has been discussed, the contractor may, at its option, initiate its own proposal. But at final stage, it's always the engineer who will instruct the variation. It was just a reminder, and now I will share with you some experience. The problem we have faced many times in our law firm is the difficulty simply to identify what is a variation. I'm not talking about law, I'm not talking about the regulation, I'm just talking about how the FIDIC Pink Book is drafted, the 2010 edition. Unlike 2017 edition, it's only written on subclause 13 that the engineer instruct variation. It does not specify, it does not mention that the engineer instruct variation by a notice, meaning that you have no, it's not compulsory to mention the subclauses. It's not compulsory to indicate that's a variation. And this may entail a real uncertainty of the nature of the instruction. Is it really a variation? And I have reproduced here some example we may have received on different projects. The engineer requests the contractor to consider. The engineer suggests the contractor to can advise that there is space to install, to minimize the cost, etc. So is it an instruction of variation or not? We have received many times this kind of instruction. So in that very situation, the easiest thing is to send back a notice to the engineer saying, hey, Mr. Engineer, can you please specify if it is a variation or not? Or if it is not, do you consider it's an amendment of the contract? And in that case, we have to see with the employer, or is it only a friendly request? And then it's up to you to read it or not. The other problem we may face is the difficulty to be paid in case of variation. Because as you can see in the FIDIC Pink Book, it's not required to have an upfront agreement when the variation is directly instructed. And sometimes contractors will go straight forward and perform the work. And then they face many problems to be paid. We can say no problem because a Pink Book is a kind of red book. So you have a BOQ, so it's not so complicated to assess. But most of the FIDIC book we are working on, Julian's, even the one I'm talking about, that's contracts which are based on FIDIC, and they are largely amended during the tendering period. So you may face some difficulties. To summarize, and it's what I want to emphasize what has been said this morning, in this situation, the contractor will refuse to implement the work prior approval. The engineer will consider he has to execute, and he will stick on Vietnamese law calculation. And finally, often, the employer in Vietnam will request an amendment of the contract. Of course, if you look at Vietnamese law, you may consider you have to sign an amendment. But I recall you that for big infrastructure projects, sometimes it takes 1.5 years to sign an amendment to the contract, which is not possible. You cannot execute a contract because it's the FIDIC book are used to implement the work, never stop, and then you claim. But if each time you have to make a variation, you need to sign an amendment to the contract, your project is stopped. You cannot go ahead. So for sure, there is a current difficulty between the interpretation, the contractual interpretation by, let's say, international contractor, and the law by the employer. And I completely agree with Julian by saying that a variation is made under the contract as opposed to an amendment, which is a variation to the contract. That's what we should apply when we are looking at a FIDIC Pink Book. That's my view as a foreign lawyer, for sure, because for me, you sign an agreement in which you agreed that you may have some variation, so that's civil law. You have to stick to your contract. But on the other hand, you will have the Vietnamese party who will consider that, and I can understand the point, that you have to sign an amendment anytime, which can be true on the content. But if you don't stick to the procedure, and I have an example, last week or 2 weeks ago, it was not in this project, we received a letter saying, oh, you failed to pass the test, subclause 7.4. We'd like you to perform new test. It was a notice from the employer, and we have to amend the contract. But you sign a FIDIC contract, and 7.4 expressly tells you that a new test should be deemed as a variation, and you should apply subclause 13. So for sure, I have not the answer, but currently there is some big discrepancy between Vietnamese law and FIDIC book as they should be applied. Thank you.